Good morning. This morning I have some reminders for writing your literary analysis. I promised that I would talk a little bit more about introduction and commentary. Hopefully you are finishing up your evidence scavenger hunt that we started yesterday, and you'll be moving into writing your rough draft. So let's look at some of those things that you're going to want to remember. I created these tips based on some of the common mistakes that I noticed from looking at your research papers. So here's just some reminders about writing your introduction. Please remember that at some point in your intro, you have to preview the topic. And since you're writing about literature, that includes providing some sort of context or frame of reference. Just a sentence or two that kind of encapsulates the novel. I'm not talking about a long summary here. You can assume your reader has read the novel, but you do want just a little bit of context provided. And within that context, you have to always mention the title and the author of the piece of literature that you're dealing with. And then you can transition to your thesis. And then make sure that your thesis is strong, that you're stating your claim. What is the focus of your paper? That's what your thesis should tell me. And your thesis should be well written with strong language, which means no be verbs. If your thesis statement is supposed to be the strongest sentence in your entire essay, then you have to avoid that weak sentence construction, which is typically what be verbs create. And then finally, try to avoid listing your subtopics if possible. I know that three-prong type of thesis is what we were taught when we were very young, and it works as a starting point, but it's not the most sophisticated form of writing. So I would really encourage you to try to write that thesis beyond that, listing your 3 points or your buckets or whatever you call them nowadays. Sometimes you can, if you have a specific prompt that you've been given for your paper, sometimes you can use that to generate some ideas for not only providing the context, but also for formulating that thesis. And then after your introduction, you get to the real meat of your essay, which is your body paragraphs. So here you see just a little template that shows the basic pieces that you would include in a body paragraph. Okay, starting with the topic sentence and ending with a conclusion. Those really aren't optional. You have to have that sentence at the beginning of each paragraph that really introduces the subtopic that you're dealing with. Then you can get into your evidence and your commentary. And for this assignment, I said you had to have at least 2 pieces of evidence from the novel. So what's your first piece of evidence? Now, you're talking about some sort of direct quote that you've been choosing in your evidence scavenger hunt. And you're always going to want to use a lead-in with that direct quote. And then once you have given your evidence, then you can take some time for that commentary where you are analyzing and explaining and interpreting that piece of evidence for your reader. You'd have to really get into why it matters. Then you can transition to your second piece of evidence and your commentary. What I want you to notice in the template is how much more commentary there is than everything else. Okay, for every piece of evidence, you see 2 pieces of commentary. And I think that's where we're sometimes lacking. Either A, we're not writing enough commentary, or B, our commentary is not insightful. Okay, it's very obvious, it's just restating, and it doesn't show a lot of insight. All right, let's break this down a little bit more, talk briefly about evidence, which is what you were looking for yesterday. When you're looking for evidence, you just have to ask yourself, where in this story can I find an example that proves the point that I'm trying to make? And is this example important? Is it relevant? Is it interesting? Does it really help show the point of my thesis and support the focus of my entire paper? And then commentary, which is really what I want to talk more about today, is your opportunity to make your case and explain to the reader what the evidence really means, and that the evidence is solid, that the evidence is true, and that the evidence actually does connect back to the overall focus of that particular paper and perhaps even to your thesis statement. Okay, commentary really is supposed to be insightful, where the writer, that's you, the writer is making inferences about the evidence. And a lot of times those inferences are about thematic ideas, universal truths about human nature and, the human existence. So when we think of commentary, we ask ourselves, how does the evidence prove my topic sentence, or how does it prove my thesis? Your answer to that question can become commentary. What does the evidence show about my thesis? Why is this evidence important? What does this quote mean? Your answers to those questions are where you get your ideas for commentary. And remember, you're trying to dig beyond the obvious. Okay, if the point that you're trying to make is that someone is brave, and then you give a piece of evidence, something that character did in the story, commentary has to go beyond a sentence that says, and this quote shows why the character was brave. Because you're just repeating yourself in that case, and that's not commentary because there's no insight. All right, here's an example. And these are student-written examples that I'm giving you today. This one's from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And it's a bit of a character analysis. And then for this particular paragraph, and I've only given you the opening of the paragraph, the topic sentence is talking about how Harry is a champion to the insecure students at Hogwarts. Okay, so then in green, you see a piece of evidence from the actual story. Malfoy takes Neville's Remembrall, so Harry takes a broom and gets it back. If you've seen the movie The Sorcerer's Stone, you can probably remember that scene. Now, what you see in yellow is the commentary. So Harry can't stand someone who picks on others, so he becomes a hero to those less fortunate. He's found a place where he belongs, and he wants to protect the vulnerable. Guys, everything that you see there in yellow is out of the writer's head. Harry never tells us those things about himself. Okay, we're making those inferences based on his behavior, and then we're connecting it back to the point of the paragraph that Harry is a champion to the more insecure students. Okay, here's another example, and this one's more detailed, again from a character analysis paper about the Samurai's Garden. And I'm not going to read the paragraph all the way through, but I do want us to take a look at some of the commentary that is inserted within. So in this particular paragraph, the writer is proving that the main character, Sachi, is a courageous woman. Okay, so basic character analysis. So the writer is going to be looking for examples that show Sachi's courage, and then she's going to, or the writer, he or she, is going to have to explain how that example shows courage. Don't just tell me it shows courage, show me that it shows courage. Let's dig into those examples just a little bit. So the first example that the writer gives talks about a moment when the character Sachi was a leper and her family tried to get her to commit suicide, but she chooses not to. All right, so what you see in yellow is the commentary. How does this show courage? Well, that takes a lot of personal strength to ignore other people's pressures to conform, especially when it's your family that's trying to pressure you into something. That takes a lot of personal strength. She stays alive. She forces herself to start her life over, and that too takes a great amount of bravery. So you can see how the first sentence is really interpreting and making that connection back to bravery, and then the second sentence is expanding upon that idea. Let's look at evidence number 2. The second example talks about her friend's home that was damaged by a storm, and so she travels a very long distance just to help them out. Okay, so the commentary in yellow, thinks through that. Why is that courageous? Well, it's a huge step for Sachi because she hadn't even left her own town for 40 years. That's a significant moment in her life. How is that courageous? Well, I mean, in this commentary, we're not even just going to say it's courageous. We're going to say it's heroic because they never asked for her help. She does it on her own, out of her own will. Okay, and again, this is a student example. You can see all the be verbs, and I know we all want to go back and edit those out and make these sentences stronger. But one thing this example does do is show you how commentary should work. And then the last example is about Stephen asking Sachi about her past and how she doesn't really want to tell him, but she has to because of the relationship that's developing between these two characters. So again, in yellow, we see the commentary. So why is this brave that she confronts her past? Well, because she's not avoiding it anymore. She's facing it head on. She's accepting her previous faults as and her scarring, I think that should say scarring memories, which demonstrates fearlessness and mental vigor. You notice how the commentary doesn't just go back to the word courageous. It uses other words, other language that also demonstrate an idea of courage. We have bravery, we have fearlessness, we have mental vigor, we talked about sheer will, and all of those things are good illustrations of what it really means to be courageous. What I want you to notice is that in every single one of these examples, the commentary was more lengthy than the evidence. Okay, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So like for every piece of evidence, you have one sentence, right? You're going to need at least 2 sentences of commentary to interpret and explain. Your paper should have more commentary than evidence. So try to remember that as you're writing, and that was illustrated a little earlier. Some final reminders. Use lead-ins with all your direct quotes. Okay, I know my examples were a little bit different. You're using direct quotes, so you will have to have a lead-in for every single one. The other thing that you'll have to have is page numbers. Cite your page number parenthetically. Since you have a PDF version, you can use the PDF page number. Make sure that your quotes are concise. Do not make them super long. You want them short, you want them to the point. Only use the direct quote, just that portion that really matters for the point that you're trying to make. And then finally, as I just said, write more commentary sentences than you do evidence sentences. At least 2 sentences of commentary for every piece of evidence. I want your paper to be heavier on your own thoughts and your own insight instead of relying so much on the actual novel. Okay? All right, so keep these things in mind as you start writing your rough draft. Refer to this PowerPoint as many times as you need to as you're developing your essay. It is a short essay, so I don't imagine that it'll take you very long, but I would like for you to follow these examples and these templates and kind of the basic rules for writing commentary. Follow that from the very beginning so that you have less revision to do later on. Okay, happy writing. We'll talk again soon.